Hey friend, I'm Danielle Damrell, and I am so grateful that you're listening to the Created Worthy podcast. This show is all about honoring the life stories of women from different ages, beliefs, backgrounds, and experiences. Everyone's got a story, and instead of getting stuck in the trap of unworthiness, this is a safe place for stories to be shared. On this show, we chat about the transformative power of creative processing too, and how we can utilize our God-given creativity with intention to heal, grow, find joy, create simplicity in the midst of our chaotic lives. So pull up a seat at our table because we are all created worthy. Hello, welcome back to the Created Worthy podcast. Today, I'm joined by another worthy warrior, Kristen Hallinan. Kristen is a sought-after writer and speaker, passionate about helping women redeem the pain of their past and move towards a healthier and more hopeful future. On a mission to equip women and support families, Kristen previously worked as the Director of Development for MOPS International. She enjoys working with teen moms, crisis pregnancy centers, and serving as a pre-marital mentor with her husband, Shawn, in Dallas, Texas. Legacy Changer is Kristen's debut book, and you can find her other writings in publications like Relevant Magazine, The Joyful Life, and others. Laughing with and chasing after her 4 children helps burn off the calories she consumes from her favorite treat, homemade gluten-free churros. Those sound delicious. I want some. Kristen and I met in September at a women's ministry retreat, and we immediately hit it off. And I know that's true because it took approximately 5 minutes in the car before we started sharing about our similar experiences with spiritual warfare and childhood trauma. So I knew right then that I was with my people and that God had put us together for a very special reason. So Kristen, thank you so much for joining us today on the Created Worthy podcast. I can't wait to hear even more about your real life story.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the way that we hit it off right away
So
because
fun.
if you can't go deep, then what are we even doing?
Yeah,
We were having great
exactly.
conversations.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. I will always forget. I will always remember. I will never forget that car ride. Like, I was like, I don't even know who I'm picking up. I'm in Buc-ee's for the first time. This store is giant and a little overwhelming. And I'm
yes,
just going to look for people who look like they're looking for me. So,
yes, it was a good plan. It worked out.
yes, it worked out. We got in the car in the such a beautiful scene, like driving through Tennessee, and just
Mm.
immediately went deep. And I was like, this girl, she gets me. So I'm just so happy that you are here. And I can't wait to hear just a little bit more about where you're from and um, all the things in your life that you've walked through that have brought you to where you're at today.
Yeah. So I was raised in Southern California and then spent about 21 years in Colorado before 4 years ago moving to Texas with my husband and kiddos. I've been married for 17 years now, and we have 4 kids, which is just a picture of God's grace and redemption. My therapist likes to remind me that people that start with stories like mine don't typically end up with stories like mine. And
Hmm.
that's just God all over it. When we moved to Texas, it was the 25th move of my life. So we just had so much upheaval when I was growing up. My parents, primarily my dad, was always chasing happiness and what could make his heart feel better. And maybe just a new job, maybe just a new city, maybe just a new house. And we were raised, my sister and I, in a home without faith. My dad was and still is an atheist. My mom was raised Catholic, but for whatever reason, just did not choose to bring it into our house. So I truly had no idea that Christmas was about anything other than Santa Claus and had never heard the word Jesus spoken in my house
Hmm.
until in 7th grade, I started spending the night at my best friend's house on Saturday night and going to her dad's church. He was a pastor planting a church in a little local high school. And I would go on Sunday mornings and hear the words that he was speaking, but had truly no idea what it meant or like these words coming out of his mouth didn't feel like
Yeah.
sentences to me. And
You're like, did you
really,
have questions like, is this a cult? Because I remember the first time
no,
I was around like Christian people, I was like, is this a cult? Like, what are you singing to?
100%. And because my parents were so just nervous and felt weird about letting me go to church, that contributed to it. Like, am I
Mm,
doing something wrong? Like, should I feel
yeah.
guilty about being here? But what Jesus used to really kind of kick all of those doubts to the side for me was the fact that when I was in their home, I felt so wildly different than I did in
Mm,
my own home. The love was palpable. There was not the stress and the hypervigilance and just like walking on eggshells that it felt like in my house
yeah.
oftentimes. And the love and acceptance, I even got disciplined there, and that felt loving to me.
Yes. Yes.
Just the guidance. And so he used what their family looked like and the way they loved me to plant seeds in my heart that when I found myself at CU Boulder in college a couple decades later and was just living it up, I knew where I should be when
Mm,
I wanted my life to start looking different and took myself to church all by myself. And I think
wow.
if it wasn't for Melissa's family back then, that seed wouldn't have been planted in my heart.
Yeah. So what year in college were you when you decided to go to a local church?
That was early sophomore year.
Okay.
And I started dating my now husband very shortly after
Wow.
that. He was raised in a house of believers, but had almost not fallen asleep, but just kind of like stagnant in his faith.
Yeah.
And he'd been a believer for as long as he could remember. And so it was really fun having me have 5,000 questions and be on fire for the Lord, and him kind of having a lot of those answers, but then rejuvenating his own desire to be on fire. So that was cool.
Wow. That is quite a drastic difference from childhood to being, well, and CU Boulder, that's a pretty Boulder in itself, for those that don't know, is how do we say this in like a nice way? It's hippie village.
Yeah. And it's honestly a dark place.
Yeah,
Like,
it carries a weight of spiritual darkness. I've said that
yep.
since I've moved here.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know, I am based out of Aurora, Colorado right now, but I've lived all over the Denver area. So that was another thing that Kristen and I connected on pretty much right away was like, oh, you're a Colorado gal? Like you know the culture there? I feel ya.
Yes. Yes.
Because it is kind of a for me at least, and I think for you, we talked about this. There overall, there's a different type of, for lack of better words, vibe, spiritual
Mhm.
vibe, when it comes to Christianity and Jesus, and really a wave of, well, a lot of new age practices,
Mhm.
but a huge, huge, huge focus on how you are your own God
Yes.
and how like your search for peace will come from just you focusing inward and you connecting with your truest inner self and your highest being. And with that, although from the outside it might sound okay, you're leaning on a broken human fleshly person within yourself and not a grounded, rooted source of truth and light. And so it can be really confusing. And I imagine as a young person in college, doing the normal college things, it sounds like your freshman year, and then deciding like, no, I need something more real. I need to connect. I need to get, rooted in something good. Like that in itself had to have been kind of a hard decision, or maybe a decision of like that it was countercultural for sure, especially for the CU Boulder campus. So, what was there something that you walked through that made you realize like I really need to get plugged in?
I think it was desperation,
Mm,
of loneliness and emptiness, and just a desperation to feel loved and to feel worthy and to feel known. And all these worldly things that I was chasing was definitely not doing it for me. The book that I have coming out is called Legacy Changer, and that really happened in like three stages. I think coming to Christ was absolutely the first major transformation. But it took then a lot of learning and a lot of relationship building with between me and God for me to start to learn new things about myself. And it wasn't until we lost a baby in between our second and third kiddos that I finally found myself in counseling, because growing up
Mm.
counseling, just the whole idea of it, therapist was very shamed. That's woo woo stuff. They're just trying to manipulate you and steal your money. But I was not okay after I lost that baby and found myself in a counseling office, and then ended up grieving the baby in a healthy and faster way than I thought was going to be possible. But God was like, no, 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 like, get your little booty back in that chair. You're here for more than this. And I had a
Yeah.
lot of grieving to do over things that either were painful in my childhood, but also a lot of things that didn't happen that should happen in a childhood. Pieces of my story that were missing or felt empty or felt full of shame. And I
Yeah.
needed to grieve those before I could get healthier.
Yeah, for sure. And therapy is a incredible tool to be able to explore those inner places, but with people that really understand the psychology and the science behind our brain and trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and what healing looks like from a really physiological and psychological level, which is kind of different than a lot of even just the in the Christian culture,
Yep.
right? And then, yeah, with the generations in the past, I don't know for certain, but it seems like at least people that are more like our parents' age, there was kind of an aversion to therapy just naturally. But now we see that that culture is shifting and people are really experiencing the value of therapists and the different therapy types and how there are different methods. And just like with finding a cute pair of shoes or the right car, like it is a lot more important. There's a lot more weight on finding the right therapy, the right therapist or therapy type. But there are all different therapy types that fit people with different needs, different pasts, different experiences.
So my therapist had a great analogy. I feel like she said, when you get in a car accident and you have a broken leg and you go to the hospital, you want your surgeon to talk to you about it and kind of explain what's happened. But if he just continues to talk to you about it, your broken
Mm,
leg is not going to get fixed. You are going to need surgery and set those bones and get a cast and get in there and really do the healing work. And it's the same with trauma, because if we just talk about the trauma and we aren't engaging in trauma therapies, then it's not going to be the same level of healing to our
yeah.
nervous system that's been so affected.
Yeah. Well, I think for those of us who have gone through, extended amounts of trauma or trauma over an extended amount of time, our nervous systems actually get so used to just being unregulated, dysregulated, overstimulated, all of the things that are not within that like normal functioning place, right? So anxiety, stress, chronic illnesses, just getting colds back to back, like those things become normal for us. And it's almost as if like you just get so used to it that you're like, I'm not really affected by it. But little do you know, your body is affected by it. And actually, it can cause, as you get older, all kinds of health issues, which I think is another thing that I've been learning about recently is just like how important it is to work on your, you know, physical, mental, um, spiritual being so that your nervous system can become more regulated, so that you can experience a life where joy is possible and peace is actually obtainable. So, can you take us through what it has been like for you, this healing journey to get to a place where I know you still have days that are hard. I do too. We were just talking about that before jumping on this recording, but what have you found to be most helpful, and what therapy types have you gone through that have been um, that have moved the needle forward?
Yeah. So you mentioned healing as a journey, and it is exactly that because there's no such thing as a destination. And I'm finished and I'm all the way healed. And
Yeah.
that is only true in the other side of death when Jesus has fully sanctified us. But yeah, so healing, I think for me, learning that was important to know that I wasn't failing just because there's more to do, but there'll probably always be more to do. I had
Hmm.
to get out of crisis mode initially because I was so reactive to trauma and had learned so many yucky coping mechanisms and just ways of reacting out of shame that my marriage and my kids, um, all my relationships, my friendships were suffering. And so it wasn't until about 5 years ago that I had to ask my mom, to leave our home after her being there was
Mm.
just magnifying the lack of health that already existed in the relationship. And I felt like I just got slapped in the face with the realization that I had always wished my mom would protect me from my grandma's yuckiness and dysfunction, and she didn't. And then here I was doing the same exact thing to my kids, inviting it into our house and not shielding them from it. And, essentially communicating to them that I approved of all of this because this is what I was allowing to go on in our house.
Hmm.
And I was not going to let that happen anymore. And so I asked her to leave. And that's when I really started doing some very deep story work that was a lot of the talk therapy and diving into my story, uncovering all those fragmented memories that you get from trauma
Yeah.
and piecing together like what really has happened in my story. And from there I did and I continue to do EMDR. And that is a specific therapy that it can involve vibrators or lights or something that is connecting both sides of your brain, and that you get the opportunity to rewire these memories. So, of course, we're still going to remember things, but now we can remember it and not feel it in our nervous system as if it's happening to us again right here and right now. And
Mm.
hopefully create enough bandwidth within ourselves to make new and better choices and start the hard work of kicking out those yucky coping mechanisms and bringing in healthy ones. That was a big piece of it for me because I wasn't addicted to alcohol or drugs, but
Hmm.
my brain was very addicted to anything that would soothe it. And so sometimes that was yelling in anger, or sometimes that was spending way too much money. And so these behaviors that I had developed were not serving me well. And I needed to be like, okay, what can meet the same need of soothing my brain, like coffee with a girlfriend, or going for a walk, or wrestling my kids, or, what can I replace this with to start inching my family towards what I really want it to look like versus what I've been allowing it to look like.
Yeah. Wow. So many good pieces of advice in there just from your lived experience. If you don't mind, I would love to go back to the story of you having to kick your mom out for the good of your family. It sounds like that was really a changing point for you in your healing journey, or a turning point.
Yeah.
And I know personally that it has been a challenge to figure out how to navigate healthy boundaries with people um, who maybe they can't fully go away, but they also can't have the same type of power that they did in the past. So,
Mhm.
could you maybe walk us through how you were able to make that decision? Like, whether what did something happen in your household that was just like a very clearly unhealthy behavior that you were like, no more, gotta leave. I'm not doing this? Or was it more of just kind of a process of like, oh, you are bringing a dynamic to my home that is not cohesive to what I have been called to do, as a parent, as a mom?
Both is the answer. I was becoming more and more aware. I just couldn't ignore anymore the patterns and the general dynamic that was happening in the home, the stress level that I just constantly felt, and I felt like I had no capacity left to do the things God had called me to love the people well that He had given me to take care of. So that was definitely part of it. And then also, she was in a lot of physical pain from some health things and injuries. And I would find her oftentimes in the morning in laying on the floor of what we had given her one of my son's rooms to be her bedroom. And she'd be laying on the floor, and yesterday's clothes and pills would just be scattered all over the bed and all over the
Mm,
floor. And this was happening morning after morning. And I was terrified what was going to happen if my 18-month-old at that time had walked in there and found all those pills before I did.
mm,
And so I'm picking her up and putting her back in the bed and cleaning everything up. And after this happening repeatedly, I went to Walmart and grabbed a safe and said, "We're keeping medicine in the safe now. And you can let me know when it's time for your meds, and I will give them to you."
mhm.
And for somebody that was not used to boundaries, that obviously was not a fun experience.
Yeah.
And she was able to respect that. And so things kind of escalated from there. And I could just see with more clarity the damage that was being done. And I didn't even like how it was all having me behave.
Mm,
That was, to me, just as bad as what was happening with her, as what I was allowing, who I was allowing me to become, and the kind of mom I was when I was dealing with that situation. Um, so I just started to get real good at setting the boundary. And I started with like my intention. My intention for this relationship is love and mutual respect. And I want that for both
mm,
of us. And also, this is what I need you to respect in our house. And it wasn't just with my mom, it was with my husband's mom and other people. We started to kind of figure out our voice and how to set boundaries that would protect our family. And then the third piece was just preparing for the reaction, because
mhm,
people are, even if it's like a really unhealthy relationship that we're used to, they're used to the dance that we typically do. And all of a
mhm.
sudden, when one person starts doing a different dance, you're like, "Hey, I liked that dance we were doing. I was used to it. I knew the steps. Like, I don't
Yep.
want to do this new dance."
Yeah.
And so it's rarely, in my experience, boundaries are received with a full and happy heart the first time, because
Yeah.
oftentimes we're putting them in place in a relationship that's already hard and dysfunctional, and that person's probably not super well equipped to receive it in a healthy way.
Right.
So just preparing your expectations for that, and also preparing ahead of time what your response is going to be
Yeah.
for when the boundaries are not respected.
You know what this reminds me of is actually a conversation I was having with a really good friend yesterday. She was telling me about something called gray walking. Have you ever heard of gray
No, but
walking?
I want to know.
Okay, so gray walking, I believe that's what it's called. You can YouTube it. Um, but basic overview is how to deal with it's a way of dealing with people who are like narcissists or just toxic people who are in our lives and they just continue to invade boundaries or cross the line. And
Mhm.
essentially, it's just not feeding into their emotion, right? Because, like, we get into these unhealthy patterns with these narcissistic people or these toxic people where it becomes more natural to like raise your voice and scream at each other or, run around the house or however it manifests because they say no and you're like, this is my house and I'm going to do it this way because you're here. Or,
Mhm.
I asked you not to say something and you're saying it anyway. Or I asked you not to like treat me like that and you're still treating me like that. So please stop treating me like that and giving them the satisfaction of the emotion, even in your voice, right? Like
Mhm,
raising our voices up and down, but instead just taking a really low tone, monotone voice and
mhm.
gray, I maybe it's gray rocking. Hold on. Let me Google it real fast because now I'm like second guessing myself, but I'm pretty sure it's gray rocking. ROCK. Gray.
My sister is a psych nurse, and she is awesome at this skill.
Oh,
When
heck
I see
yes.
people
I-
not treating her well, she immediately goes into that more subdued monotone. It seems like this has been really
yes.
frustrating for you.
Yes.
And
It says
oh,
the gray rock method is where you deliberately act unresponsive or unengaged so that an abusive person will lose interest in you. And I was watching a YouTube video and then just a bunch of people on social media, giving examples of how to do this. And I realized like this is something that I've been practicing probably because I've done a lot of therapy as well. She didn't give me this term per se, but it's like just not responding. Like if somebody's yelling at you or you have a narcissistic partner and they're like, why didn't you put my food on the table and whatever, you're just like silent. Or you're like, you're welcome for your food. Like there's just
uh-huh.
no response, no engaging. And it's as if they're talking to a gray, boring rock, right? Like there's
Oh,
no cool
yes.
ridges, there's no like differing colors. It's just gray rock. Like they are literally talking to a brick wall. And when I heard that, I am really a big fan of like when you know better, you do better. And like when you have a term, then you can practice it more intentionally, which I think is why in some cases it is helpful to have either a diagnosis or to have like just like in therapy, certain types of therapy, certain practices, certain meditations. When you have like a certain thing to call it, then you're able to explain it better. You're able to practice it better. Um,
Yes.
and when I heard that, I was like, okay, that actually is something I can do. I know I can do it because I've been subconsciously doing it for years. But also, like, just in navigating hard relationships, like remembering that the the escalation a lot of times with unhealthy people comes from our reaction. So going back to what you were saying, planning for that reaction, it's like if all you can plan, you like maybe you can't plan for what their reaction is going to be, but you can plan for what your reaction is going to be. You know that
Mhm.
you turn into a gray rock.
Yes.
And that's what you do when they react, however they're going to react, because they're a toxic person. So you can anticipate that there's going to be pushback or, a lot of times it's like name calling or you
Mhm.
did this to me or you ruined my life or there's all kinds of things that we know that toxic and abusive people can say, but really being able to be like, you know what? No, this, my boundary is this. And if you cross it, one thing I love about your story is that you actually did get to the point where you were like, enough is enough and you got to go.
Mhm.
And another thing I was talking to my friend about was like, I didn't even think about that being an option. Like if somebody continues to push your boundary, I don't know why like it didn't come to my mind for my specific situation where I could have just like gotten up and walked away. I just felt like all of a sudden I got into like this, I don't even know how to explain it, but I'm sure you'll relate where you just your trauma brain turns on and you just kind of shut down and are all of a sudden a tiny little girl, or you
Yeah.
just feel so powerless and you're like, I set a boundary, I did the thing I'm supposed to do, but like they're not respecting it, so now what? And then we just kind of can get paralyzed in
Yeah.
whether it's fear or just worthlessness or whatever it is. And at some point you have to be willing to say like, part of having boundaries is following through with, if you break the boundaries, this is what happens. You
Yeah.
no longer get to stay in my house, or you no longer get to have a lunch with me, or
Yeah.
whatever the case is.
And
And so,
having the
yeah, go ahead.
courage, I think, to do that, because it takes a lot of courage when you're coming from such a broken place.
Yeah.
For me, that courage was found in getting my identity straight, because
Mm,
trauma is such a robber of our true identity, our Christ given identity. And our brain trying to make sense of, especially our little kid brain, trying to make sense of all these things happening around us.
Yeah.
It is easy for our minds to fill in some story that's a
Yeah.
lie. And we start believing that about ourselves.
Mm.
And then anything that seems to confirm it feels so painful. And we want to fight against and prove our worthiness. And that's not who I am. And for me, that was keeping me stuck in these loops of engaging the people that I should have been gray rocking and
Yes.
disengaging. And but so it was not until I got some of my identity straight and figured out who I was in Christ and that
Yeah.
he was good no matter what, and that he felt the same about me no matter what, that that's where I got the courage to finally start setting boundaries.
Yeah. So how did you continue to walk in your call of who you are in Christ, right? Like God has given you an identity. You are rooted in him. While I'm sure there have been times where people are like, "Well, you're being mean," or how could you, throw me out to the street?" How did you continue to interact with people that you're setting boundaries with while not um coming, compromising your identity in Christ? I think that's something that's been really hard for me is like, how do I treat someone with kindness? Because God has, like, that is part of my character when this person has hurt me so many times and continues to cross my boundaries.
Yeah. I think it was me learning how wildly vital boundaries are for
Mm,
not just healthy relationships, because healthy relationships, they just do this more naturally. You don't have to quite overtly set the boundaries as well. Hey, I'm tired. I don't think I'm going to go out tonight. No problem. Let's catch up next Tuesday. Okay, great. And then it's done and no one thinks about it again. And that was a boundary, but it was easily respected because it was a healthy relationship. But in these
right,
dysfunctional relationships, that's not going to go that way.
right.
And it's going to devolve into something else. And so when you're walking that line, remembering that every single emotional, mental, physical ounce of strength that is sucked out of you by this dysfunctional person's behavior is exactly that much emotional, mental, physical strength that you are not putting towards what God has called you to. And
Mm,
so not only it's not just a matter of like, I'm tough, like I can suck it up and endure it, but okay, maybe that's true, but also now you are not doing what God has called you to. You're totally missing the call on your life and you are affecting people around you and affecting their call because you're supposed to be engaging their stories in a healthy way. And so not only me, but the next generation is suffering as well. And
yeah,
so when I started to look at it that way, that like, you're not just robbing me of my happiness in this moment, but you're robbing me of purpose and of generational impact. Like that got a lot more serious to me.
yeah, yeah, exactly. The generational impact, which then ties into your book, Legacy Changer. Um, Talk to me a little bit about the heart and story behind this book, because I know that it wasn't just all of a sudden you had an idea and 2 months later it was executed. That's not how books work.
No.
Usually there's a journey and a story that leads to the execution of, of the actual message that God has called you to share. So tell us a little bit about what your heart was behind Legacy Changer and what you went through
Yeah.
to really plant this message.
Well, it took me so many years of learning and reading and therapy and workshops and prayer and mentors and coaches and all the things
All the
to
things.
start to finally get on the healing journey. And I wanted to package the very best of what I had learned and the most useful, practical things of what I learned and things that felt revolutionary to my mind that was so stuck in hypervigilance and the dysfunctional patterns. Um, I wanted to put them all in one neat little tidy package that somebody who's at the very beginning of their journey can open and not endure so many years of trying to figure out all of these resources on their own. So it is meant to be a hope and an encouragement through some of the stories I share, but really it's a practical toolkit of what can you do today, and then after that tomorrow, what are we doing to change your legacy? Because so often people are talking about legacy like when they're then later in life, but really our
Hmm.
legacy is formed in all the tiny things that we're doing now earlier in our
Yeah.
life. And
Yes.
so I wanted to give people the resources um, in a way that felt really manageable, and that they knew that they could just take those one step at a time
Yeah.
and get there. Because I put a crown on the front of the book because I wanted the idea of something that we are handed from the prior generation, and then we care for it until we hand it down to the next generation.
Hmm.
And we may have been handed like a beautiful shining crown, and all we have to do is take care of it, and then we can hand down something beautiful. But we may have been handed a crown that was tarnished and missing a gemstone and it has a chip on one side, and we're going to have some buffing and some serious repair to do, and so that we can hand down something that we're proud of. And it's not going to be perfect, but
Hmm.
hopefully our kids can improve upon that before they hand it down to their kids. And
Right.
just to see that this is something we're all working on together.
Yeah. I that is a beautiful, beautiful picture of what generational legacy is, right? And I've once heard it been told passing the torch or handing over the flag or whatever. But I love the picture of a crown and how maybe it's been dropped or maybe it's been ran over by a car. But doing the work, the work that we are individually called to, and the fact that God places us, specific people, um, in our generations, like where we're at in our generations, because he knows that we're capable and equipped to do the work, right? Like you were
Mhm.
handed a crown that wasn't even connected to God at all. Or
Yeah.
maybe minorly through your mom, but
Yeah. No, not
also on
really.
the opposite end, like completely no from your dad and as an atheist, right? And so for you, it's like now this crown has to be rooted in a real identity. So can you take us through a little bit of what the process has been for you in that the background story of course, you coming to the Lord, but really like basing your identity off of a God that you didn't like you didn't grow up knowing, but now you're setting up your children to have an understanding of the Lord. You've worked with MOPS, you've worked with probably thousands, I'd assume, moms all over the world,
Yeah.
um, and helping them to see their worth and value in motherhood and how the Lord is here to provide and care for us even in the hard years of raising young children. But all of that is part of you reforming this crown that like probably wasn't even in the shape of a crown and wasn't even connected to a kingdom.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, just tell us a little bit about that process specifically.
Yeah. So much of my identity, I was looking to the left and the right and like searching for somebody to tell me who I was, because I just felt so disconnected. And when I started to do a lot of intentional story work and dive in and try to make sense of all of these fragmented memories and what really happened and in what order and what impacted, a lot of the focus was on hard things. But what I started to see and what I did not expect was to see God's goodness in it, because stories that start like mine don't usually end like mine. And so to
Yes.
see, like, if this story kept going in a way that would make sense to the world, like, this is not the turn that it would have taken. And to see just God's hand on that. And that's what helped me to finally start really trusting him as good.
Mm.
Because before that, I could pray for everybody under the sun and believe wholeheartedly that God was hearing those prayers and was going to answer them and that he was good for them. But I was scared to find out if he was good for me. And I was not taking questions to him. I was not taking fears to him. I didn't want to give him the chance to let me down and to leave me like everybody else had, because I didn't know what I was going to do with that. I needed to believe that he was probably going to be good for me, but I was too scared to really find out.
Right.
And so doing that story work and seeing his goodness was the window that I needed to start stepping into trusting that he's good.
That is so good. Oh my gosh. It's just so incredible to hear all the ways that God just like wiped away the tears and helped you reform that crown and has helped you to have a clear vision for what you want your future to be like and the kind of legacy that you are on a mission to leave for your children and for all of those in this world who you've already impacted. That is so encouraging and so inspiring. Ah, I'm just
You're
like lost
inspiring
for
mama
words.
right back at you. I feel like
Oh,
you live this message so well.
oh.
And the way you're leading your family and your marriage and your daughter, like you are making a tremendous generational impact.
You too, my friend. I am so grateful for you and just this whole friendship that we have been able to create. I can't wait to see all the incredible things. Tell me when your book launches, and then I want to talk a little bit about your creative processing methods because
Yeah,
you shared some
absolutely.
really good ones.
Um, Book launches February 20th.
Oh
And
my gosh. So maybe the
yeah,
week that this podcast airs, I'm gonna have to check on that.
yes. Yeah, you can get it wherever books
Wow.
are sold. And yeah, legacy changer.
Yes, and we will have all the links in the show notes so that you guys can go grab her book. You have to follow her on Instagram as well. Um, but okay, we're gonna jump back real fast and talk about your creative processing methods, and then we're gonna talk more about the fun things that are to come in your new year,
Yeah.
in the new year, and yours and mine and all of ours. You know what I mean. Okay, so you shared that your primary creative processing methods are organizing to reduce stress, which ditto, journaling to process emotion, ditto, painting to soothe, ditto,
Mm,
dancing and singing to lift mood, amen, and cooking to connect, not ditto, but I admire that that is something you enjoy doing because not something I enjoy doing. Anyways, I don't know that I've had a guest on here who has been able to connect the creative method to the intention as well as like you have. I think I talked to you about creative processing when we were together. I can't remember. But
yes.
creative processing is a tool that we all use to activate our creative minds to process through a certain intention. And it sounds like this is something that you've probably been doing subconsciously or maybe even consciously for a very long time. Just the fact that you're like, when I'm stressed, I organize. Like, heck yeah, girl, declutter the
Yeah.
crap out of things because that will help you de-stress. And then processing emotion, like that specific type of creating really is, I call that the gateway to our subconscious. Writing is the gateway to our subconscious. Even if it
Mhm.
doesn't make sense what you're writing, like to somebody else, it doesn't matter. That's what's so beautiful about journaling is that you can just write like random trigger words or like curtain blue, red, sky. It doesn't matter. As long as
Yep.
you are processing, that is moving moving the needle forward. I really don't like that analogy. I just can't think of a different one right now.
Yeah. No, I got you.
But it's helping to create that space so that you can get to those places where you are experiencing joy, where you are experiencing love, where you are able to, practice gratitude. Because sometimes, I don't know about you, but like, especially with having a business or running a ministry or being a leader in any capacity, whether that's of your family or in a school or as a teacher, whatever it is, our minds are so busy and they're running so fast that we often don't even slow down enough to just process the reality of our here and now. And
Mhm.
that can be a one way ticket to burnout, one-way ticket to overwhelm, an unregulated nervous system. And then all of a sudden it feels like you have no purpose in your life
Mhm.
and you are depressed and anxious and you don't even know which way is up.
And you're reaching so fast for all those coping mechanisms that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
In the end,
Everything's
they're
hard.
just sucking more out of you and not filling you up. But you just keep doing it because you're kind of like in a state where you cannot think of something better to do in its place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's exactly why I love creative processing so much, is because, like, in those times where everything is just so overwhelming and you don't want to do anything, like, I'm, I have never claimed to say that, like, creative processing, it's the one thing that you will always want to do, period. It's the cure. No, that's not it at all. 99% of the time, you probably don't want to do it because creative processing is most helpful when you are feeling stressed, when you are feeling like you can't process emotion, when you aren't feeling soothed, when when you have a bad mood, when you don't feel connected, like the opposite of all of these intentions that you shared, which is why it's so important to then say, "Oh my gosh, I am so overwhelmed right now. So the thing that I really need is to process my emotion, or I am so um stressed right now. So the thing that I need to do is declutter or create space
Mhm.
or just create." Like, that's what's so great about painting, right? Is like you
Mhm.
can just pick up some watercolors at the dollar store or
Yes.
like paint with some of your kids' paints. It doesn't, whatever it is. And it doesn't have to be beautiful. But it's forcing your brain to slow down enough to be
Yeah.
present and figure out what the next right step is. Like it's kind of a restart of your nervous system in a sense. I think that God has created us to create. He is a creative being. He has created us as creative beings, and I think our creativity is the healing method. Like, he has legitimately given us a healing method that we are born with. We just have to slow down and do it.
And for me, the further away I am from creativity, the further away I am from being able to hear God. And if
That
I
is
can't
good.
calm my nervous system down enough to get creative, I probably can't calm it down enough to hear with any amount of clarity what he's saying to me.
Mm, I'm writing that down. I'm like, yep, that is a perfect way to describe it. So yeah, with every episode on Created Worthy, I encourage people to practice creative processing and make it simple. It starts with just creating. If you feel overwhelmed or you feel burnt out, my friend, slow down. Do something creative and allow God into that space. Pray, Lord, turn the prompt of the purpose of your creative outlet is to process your certain emotion or certain intention. Turn that into a prayer. Lord, I pray that you would help me to paint, to process my stress and overwhelm.
Yeah.
Lord, I pray that you would help me to find gratitude and experience peace in the process of journaling so that I can really process the emotions that I'm feeling today. Turn it
Yeah.
into a prayer. Turn it into a time of just gentle meditation. Turn on some music. Maybe you don't even need to create with your hands, but just visualize.
Mhm.
Visualize what it would be like. This is a therapy technique too. I'm sure Kristen has experienced as well, but just visualize what it would be like to be living the life you want to live. If you don't even know what you're aiming for, how are you ever going to get there? If you don't even know what the Lord has called you to, how are you ever going to achieve that or even get close to that? If you don't even know what legacy you're aiming to live
Mhm.
or aiming to leave, then how are you going to leave any legacy?
Yeah.
So those kinds of things are really, really important. And I think creative processing is just a tool to do that.
That's so good.
Yeah, I just love your answers. I'm actually going to put those in the show notes as well, directly as they are, because I think they're all just really great examples of things that you can do to process whatever you need to process. So before we close out today, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about what is coming up next for you in your life and business. Obviously, your book is coming out, but I think you have some things that are available maybe now or soon to do with your business and your ministry.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
So I have been speaking mostly around Texas, a little traveling, and just love getting to do some of the work with women. When I have longer speaking sections, I engage them in story work, and we are getting down and dirty because it's, one thing to hear about all these things, and it's another thing to start practicing them and applying them. And that's what I'm really passionate about, is getting in the weeds with the women and in the thick of their
Mm.
story and unpacking it and seeing where we can discover that God is and how we can be reminded of his truths for them. So coaching will be coming soon. And
Yay.
um, right now, if you head just to KristenHallinan.com, on the homepage, you can take the cycle breaking superpower quiz and figure out what childhood needs you had that went unmet that actually can be turned into a superpower now as you are changing your legacy. So
Oh,
that's
heck
fun
yeah.
there. And
That
then,
is so cool.
yeah, that'll guide you to some great resources that can help you based on your responses. So yeah, order the book and just follow along on Kristen.Hallinan on Instagram. And I cannot wait. I love connecting and hearing more of your stories. So if you have something that you want to share with me, or you could use coaching on your story and beginning to change your legacy, definitely reach out.
Yes. And we will have all of her links to all of the things in the show notes. Um, I am just so beyond grateful to have spent some time with you here today and for your courage and your vulnerability to show up here and to share your story. Keep stepping into the places where God has called you to, and know that the work you've done and continue to do is purpose filled and necessary. You are chosen and uniquely equipped to do the work that only you, Kristen Hallinan, can do. God has brought you through the fire so that you can be a testimony of healing and grace and redemption, because he knew you were the warrior that would and will continue to overcome. You, my friend, are created worthy. Thanks for listening and tuning in to the Created Worthy podcast. I hope that today's show resonated with you. And if it did, can you do me a huge favor and go leave a 5-star review? This helps more listeners find the show, and it expands the reach of the stories and concepts that are shared here. All the links and guest information are in the show notes. And if you're on social media, come hang out with me. You can find the Created Worthy podcast on both Instagram and Facebook, or come follow along with my personal IG page, where I just share more about the real, sometimes messy life of your fellow worthy warrior. Can't wait to talk to you soon, friend. And don't forget, we are all created worthy.